Good Monday morning. Welcome to Begin in the Word. Today we'll be continuing our study in the book of Titus, looking at Titus chapter 1, verses 7 through 8. For a bishop must be blameless, as a steward of God, not self-willed, not quick-tempered, not given to wine, not violent, not greedy for money, but hospitable, a lover of what is good, sober-minded, just, holy, self-controlled. Here, as we continue through this text, we want to notice this word bishop that comes up here. Bishop, or other words you might see in other translations, are overseer. Bishop or overseer. And this goes back to talking about the description of the office of elder that we read about, that Titus is supposed to appoint elders in every church. And he talks about how if a man is the husband of one wife with faithful children, a bishop must be blameless. And so there's this equivalence between bishop, overseer, and elder. And you can see, as we've talked about in various other places, you have the word pastor, for example, or shepherd used. They all refer to the same office. And here we get the idea of what they should be. They should have good family life, and now we move to their character more generally. We start with this word for. This word for, a bishop must be blameless. What is this about? Well, this goes back to our previous session that we saw about their family life. Why is it? Why is it that the husband of one wife is important? Why is it that the children must be faithful and not accused of rebellion or of excess and drunkenness? It's because the bishop himself must be blameless. And so those qualities about domestic life are about the bishop's blamelessness and about his credibility. There must be credibility, there must be reputation for the elder to be able to do their work. And this word blameless here, as we saw back in verse number 6, really overarches and is really the umbrella term that all of these other attributes fall into. Paul is going to give a long list of attributes that we've already read in this session here, and they form a picture of what an elder should be. And each one really deserves a whole Begin in the Word session. I know we've taken one verse at a time for some of these sessions, and we could really go one word at a time because it's filled with meaning. But what we're trying to get behind, instead of looking at each individual word, is we want to try to get behind the logic behind these overarching attributes that are found in good elders and how they show these things. And the first one that we see is that they are blameless as a steward of God. They are blameless as a steward of God. Elders must first remember that the church they shepherd does not belong to them. If we read back in Acts chapter 20, the Apostle Paul addresses Ephesian elders and reminds them of key facts as he transfers from his leadership and his mentorship as he's nearing death and his ability to influence that congregation there. He reminds them that they are shepherds over the flock of God that Christ has purchased with his own blood. The church does not belong to a person. And many pastors go astray when they think that the church is their possession, something that they have rights to. Shepherds, good elders, good pastors must work as a steward of God, for the glory of God, for the purposes of God. We don't get to pick the targets and measures of success. God does. We don't pick the manners of engagement. God does. And he is the standard of success in all things. An elder must remember at all times that the church belongs to Christ, and they have been entrusted as a steward to rightly guide that. And whenever elders or leaders in congregations begin to take ownership as though it belongs to them and they have those rights, that's when things really begin to go off the rails, completely off the rails. And so as a steward of God, they're going to be not self-willed, not quick-tempered, not given to wine, not violent. And then I want to focus in on a couple of these that I think that form sort of the basis or some of the background that gives us the logic of how they are to be. And that's this attribute right here. It's not greedy for money, but hospitable. They're not greedy for money, but they are hospitable. And there's a good case to be made that this but is where he transitions from the negative attributes to the positive attributes. But in particular, this not greedy for money is in direct contrast to hospitality, because greedy for money is about one getting, whereas hospitality is about sharing. And this is one of the important attributes that an elder must have, is they are not greedy. They're not selfish. And that's obvious because elders will have oversight over church funds. And if we can remember the example of Judas having the bag for the apostles became a stumbling block for him. And so if you got an elder that is greedy for money, they may fall into that same trap as the apostle, the disciple, Judas. However, greed reveals something greater. Greed reveals something greater. Beyond the blamelessness and the way that it undercuts the church's witness, greed is a manifestation of selfishness, of taking and getting for your own selves. But hospitality, on the other hand, is about sharing. It's about sharing. It's about the good of other people. Having people into your home and sharing your space and sharing your time and sharing your life, that is the very antithesis of this selfishness that comes with greed for money. Because often with greed for money comes greed for other things, desire to take for oneself that which is not right to have. And this shows a fundamental shift in an elder's mindset, that they must be a sharer, that they work for the steward of God to share the blessings of God with the people of God. And this is an important mindset that all Christians must go through, that they are just not there to receive, but that in the will of God, it is best for them to turn to someone who is sharing, who is contributing. And so an elder who is all about their own purposes and is not willing to share but just wants to lead for that is going to be destructive in what they do. Next, we read at this final one here, self-controlled. Self-controlled, the ability to temper one's actions. And this is gonna handle a lot of these things here that we might see about not being self-willed. Like we say, we could do a study, and it probably deserves 5 to 10 minutes of discussion on what each one of these is and its importance in how an elder should behave and how it functions to further their work, rather than to hinder it. But as you'll notice, self-control is contrasted to self-will. It's about not being quick-tempered. It's not given to much wine. It's not violent, not greedy. These things all reduce down to ability to temper one's own spirits and one's own nature so that you're not slave to your passions. And so that's a question we've got to ask. This idea of being self-controlled and acting with justice and holiness and sober-mindedness and loving what is good rather than what is evil. These all go to this idea of self-control. Is this someone who has submitted their heart to Christ? Are they serving Christ, or are they serving their passions? Is every desire that comes within their heart one that they act on, or have they learned to temper those things? Many of these things, as we mentioned on this list, there's that fundamental shift that you have to go through if you want to be effective as a Christian, to grow, to seek Christ instead of your own desires. But many of these things on this list would be detrimental for the effectiveness of a shepherd. If a shepherd is self-willed, they're going to take the congregation all sorts of bad directions. They're never going to agree with their co-shepherds. If there's someone who is quick-tempered or violent, you can see those kind of going together, quick-tempered or violent, that's going to be the sort of person who, whenever difficult or sticky or stressful situations come up, instead of responding with peace and patience for people, they're going to lash out with anger and seize control. Similarly, given to wine is an attribute where if you've got an elder who just can't stay sober, they're not going to make sound judgments. They're not going to be able to make discernments. And many times elders get calls in the middle of the night where they have to go and to serve people. They have to go and they have to be ready to give wisdom or to give counsel or to provide aid in situations of just physical health and hospital visits and things like this. And if a guy's always sleeping off alcohol or he's inebriated in the evenings, he's not going to be prepared. So this ability to be given to wine is partly about his blamelessness, about his character, about the way he's received, but it's also about his ability and function to do the work. And so elders must be people who are self-controlled, who live as a steward of God for the service of other people so they can share with them. They're self-controlled. They're not about themselves. They're not self-willed, but they serve God and they serve other people so that every action becomes about serving those two people rather than themselves. And that's who shepherds and congregations should be. People who live every moment for the glory of God as a steward of God, but they also live and choose the things they do in ways that are going to empower them and enable them and strengthen them to serve other people so that they can love what is good. Thank you for joining us today on Begin in the Word. It's our prayer that just as you begun today in the Word of God, you'll live out today in the Word of God.